Join me now, Ryan Grimm, Washington Bureau Chief of The Intercept, also TYT contributor. You can check him out on Rebel HQ. Go to tyt.com and click on Rebel HQ and under our shows and see his reporting. Ryan, welcome, brother.
Hey, good to be here.
All right, good to have you. So The Intercept's killing it. We did 2 Intercept stories on today's show alone. And I'm pretty sure your staff's a little bit less than the New York Times. So I want to talk about one of them in particular. Let's start with this and then work our way through the day's news. So it was a story on Joe Biden and how he, in essence, started the war on drugs. And so look, Ryan, I have to confess that I didn't know some of those details and how aggressively he worked with biden-thurmond, how aggressively he pushed Ronald Reagan to the right on this issue. So for those folks who didn't hear our story on it earlier, first give us the history of Biden on war on drugs a little bit, and then we'll talk about the present day ramifications.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, in the late 1970s, Joe Biden started going after Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, saying that Carter was basically being soft on crime and soft on the war on drugs. Carter was trying to move the country away from a punitive approach. His initial drug advisor had actually recommended legalizing a significant number of drugs, and eventually had to resign because he was caught at a Washington party doing cocaine with Hunter Thompson. Well, this is the kind of libertine and liberal environment that was going on in the late 1970s. The federal prison population actually fell by a quarter under Jimmy Carter in just 3 years. We're talking about down to like 20,000 federal prisoners. Now, the state level prison population was rising throughout the 1970s, but the politics was pushing against it. Joe Biden wanted to go the complete opposite direction and was demanding that Carter be much more aggressive in his funding of the drug war, in funding of police and new prisons. Carter, of course, lost to Reagan in 1980, and Biden then lost no time pushing Reagan, who was not interested at the time, believe it or not, of being kind of the Reagan that we now know him to be. He was much more interested in slashing welfare, in battling unions, in building up defense spending. He wasn't trying to kind of recreate his role as the law and order governor out in California. It was Biden who then Biden was a top-ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, teamed up with biden-thurmond, arch segregationist, outright racist, and pushed Thurmond to write tough on crime legislation that Reagan vetoed because it was too tough. Which is just an astounding statement of how extreme Biden was at the time.
So if you want to get all the details and all the devastating quotes, check out the piece in The Intercept or check out the story we did on it earlier in the show. We'll try to put the links down below on that. But now I want to talk about ramifications. So here I go again with my media critique. So I know that the average voter doesn't know. Shoot, I didn't know it, right? The depth to which Biden was the creator of the war on drugs, and all the people who got locked up. And for people that don't have the context on it, so Ryan talked about how back then there was about 20,000 people in federal prisons. By 2013, it was over 210,000 people. So nearly 10x of what it used to be because of the bills that Biden championed for decades and then eventually got passed. So my question is, how much does the media know that he is the guy who created the war on drugs? And maybe, to be fair to them, maybe they just don't know, or do they know and they're like, oh, that's not that big a deal?
So I think a lot of them don't know. And you're not alone in not knowing about that. Before historian David Stein kind of pitched this story to us, I didn't know it either. I knew that he was always a tough on crime guy. We knew that, but we assumed that he was maybe being tough on crime as a political gesture to kind of look tough against Republicans who were the real the real ones locking people up, and he's maybe moderating them just a little bit, trying to out Republican the Republicans, when in fact that turned out not to be the case. That he was actually kind of a driving force behind it. I didn't know that, and I think the media covers politics in such a way that the president gets a lot of the credit for what happens, fairly and unfairly, credit and blame, during their time in office. So the drug war ramped up under Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan launched his campaign, went on, in a racist fashion in Philadelphia, Mississippi. It's easy and Reagan, once he did get into the drug war, and once he did get into mass incarceration, he drove it himself. This was not somebody who, toward the middle and the end of his tenure, was reluctant. So it's understandable that in our collective memories, we think of Reagan as driving it and Joe Biden just as along for the ride. We know that the 1994 crime bill was called the Biden crime bill. And we know that played a significant role in ramping it up. So the media is not unaware of what Biden's role has been. It's interesting, though. His defense has always been, well, look, the 94 crime bill, you can't blame that for mass incarceration. The policies that set mass incarceration in place were already well underway by that point. You can't blame Biden 94. That's true. You can blame Biden late 70s and Biden 1980s. So now that this story is out there, it will be a question to see whether or not the media at the next debate or on the campaign trail asks him how he feels about not just being a supporter of mass incarceration over the decades, but a driving force behind it. I think to answer your question, though, a ton of people just simply didn't know what a huge role he played.
Ryan, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask you a quick inside baseball question about that. So they didn't know, and that's okay. Like we just said, we didn't know the depths of it, and until this historian came along and pointed out the exact record. So it's not a thing to beat up the media on. The inside baseball question is: so then, when you got a story like this at The Intercept, and it really illuminates his record in a way that people were not familiar with, how do you push it out and get it in front of the rest of the media so that at least they're aware, so the moderators in the next debate and the one after that, et cetera, know about it? Because until they ask those questions, the population and the voters are not going to know about it.
Right. I mean, a lot of it is actually kind of guerrilla at that level, because the number of people that you have to get the story in front of becomes pretty small. So I have my own newsletter that I send out to the public, and it's more than 100,000 folks on it. But it started as something that I sent to people like here in Washington. So it has, the cable bookers, it's got the hosts, it's got the Capitol Hill reporters, those folks. So they're going to get my spam, and they're going to see that story in their inbox probably later tonight when I send it out. And I'll send them this clip actually while I'm at it. But after that, it becomes kind of like one-on-one. Like, hey, you're just DMing and texting and emailing reporters, individual reporters, making sure that they didn't miss this. And one reason I actually started the newsletter is that I would, I'd have back when I was at the Huffington Post, I'd have a story that I thought was really big. It would be the top splash story on all across the site. I'd go on Rachel Maddow or something later that night to talk about it. It would be making the rounds, or else I thought it was, on Twitter. And then I'd see someone in Washington a few days later and say, did you see my story on XYZ? And even if it was the thing that they were on, oftentimes they'd be like, no, I actually missed that. There's just so much content that flows around the world that people just miss it, because we don't have like 3 news broadcasters in the evening anymore. We don't have just one Walter Cronkite telling everybody what's going on. People personalize their feeds, and so if they don't see it, if they're not watching Twitter for the hour that it's hot, if they are not watching that episode of Rachel Maddow, and frankly, most people under 45 or 50 are not watching anything on cable news in the evening, then there's a good chance that they're actually going to end up missing the story, no matter how many millions of people it got in front of. So you have to kind of hit them individually with it.
Yep.
And that turns out to work. It's a lot of manual labor, but there's nothing to replace it.
Right. All right. Real quick, I wanted to talk about Nadler and the kind of impeachment proceedings. So, do you have any idea what that is? Is it impeachment inquiry or is it not?
I've heard it called that. Let's go with it. It's certainly an inquiry that could lead towards impeachment. I guess. And that's the funny thing. There's so much confusion around the term impeachment too, which for some reason Democratic leaders have used to shy away from it rather than kind of lean into it. But a lot of the confusion among the public is that if somebody's impeached, if a president's impeached, then they're automatically out. And I understand why that, like, it sounds like, oh, you've been impeached, you're done. Like that's completely logical. I'm not blaming people for thinking that. But in fact, you impeach someone in the House and then you move them over to the Senate. I think Ocasio-Cortez's approach to this is exactly right. Just impeach him in the House. Just be done with it and let these vulnerable Republican senators vote to acquit Donald Trump. Let Susan Collins go to voters in Maine and explain to them why she voted to acquit, and let there be a trial that goes for a couple of weeks and makes news. They're very nervous about losing this impeachment trial, which of course they would, because you need 2/3 of the votes, and it's hard to imagine any Republicans voting. But so in a world where the process is so fluid, sure, let's call this proceeding an impeachment, the beginning of an impeachment inquiry.
But Ryan, last question on that: are they putting out a confusing message because Nadler and Pelosi don't agree? Like, if it really was an impeachment inquiry, wouldn't Pelosi do a press conference and go, "Goddamn right, we're impeaching him. That's what we're doing"? And she has obviously and actively not done that.
It's thoroughly confusing to the point where we don't even know if it's an actual inquiry. And it's interesting that we've gotten to a place in our congressional history that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee has to kind of beg and plead with the Speaker of the House just to move forward with an impeachment inquiry, whereas in the past, the chairpersons or the chairmen in the past of the committees they just went forward with what they wanted to do. But sure, the broad message that the public has gotten from House Democrats is that they are not impeaching. So they'll certainly be confused if they start to see impeachment proceedings.
God damn, man. The Democrats are such a mess. Their leadership, and then then Nadler will sometimes act outraged, like, well, I said it's an impeachment inquiry. Where's the question? Well, I don't know. We asked the Speaker of the House, and it seemed like there was a question. So
let's take that up with your boss.
All right, exactly. All right, Ryan Grim, Washington bureau chief of The Intercept. We appreciate you joining us and all the illuminating stories. Thank you.
All right, have a great night.
You too. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.